I Ain't Much, Baby, But I'm All I've Got by Dr. Jess Lair. Subtitle, Turn the Corner into a More Beautiful Life, 5 minutes at a time. If we concentrate on accepting ourselves, change will happen. It will take care of itself. Self-acceptance is so hard to get, you can't do it a day at a time. I've found that I need to run my life 5 minutes at a time. Words like these have helped to put many people on the road to self-fulfillment. Dr. Lair's ability to tell it like it is reaches us on a very personal level. In his own down-to-earth language, Lair discusses such ideas as why we are so afraid of ourselves, letting go as a life goal, love from your deepest heart, discovering your sexuality, touching people. This is a released library copy. Publisher Fawcett Crest of New York. Copyright 1969 and 1972 by Jess K. Lair, L-A-I-R. Dedication. My name is Lair, from the German Lehrer, teacher. And while I am the man in the front of the room and the name on the front of the book, you who are my students and friends and loved ones are the teachers and the author. The miracle is that so much of so many of you are here. Each time I reread this book, I feel your presences, and I am deeply moved by your speaking again across the span of days, weeks, years, even from the grave itself. The honor and joy for me is in having been with you, and in having such a family, friends, and students who were ready and waiting to love me. But first, last, and always, this book is dedicated to my wife, Jackie, who so lovingly opened my eyes to most of these things, and who so gently helps me down many of these paths. Contents. Chapter 1, This Is All We Know. The ideas in this book reflect a search that I began when I was 35 years old. I had an advertising agency in Minneapolis. I also did some marketing consultant work. I told businessmen how to make out plans for their business, and in some cases, executives how to plan their lives. And I had the world's greatest plan for my own life. I was going to work 10 to 15 more years at a business I hated and detested. But I was going to work a lot harder and faster so I could make a lot of money and I could retire. I had that plan all written up, and one day at lunch I showed it to my financial consultant and advisor. He looked at the plan and made some suggestions on it, but I felt funny about the whole thing. And on the way back to the office, all of a sudden, I had this very strange feeling. I think what happened was my heart said to my head, "Now look, if you are crazy enough to throw your whole life down a rat hole chasing something that you don't believe in, that's fine. You can throw your whole life away for money and material gains, but this Norwegian heart, it ain't going to go along with you." I had a heart attack on the way up the elevator. I staggered to my office and slumped forward on my desk until the worst of the pain went away. I got hold of a doctor in the building across the street and foolishly told him I felt well enough to walk over. So I walked over. He laid me out flat on an examining table and found I was right in the middle of a heart attack. He called an ambulance. They put me on a stretcher and hauled me to the hospital. As I lay there in that hospital bed, I thought to myself, boy, some way you've gone a long, long way down the wrong path through a whole long series of rotten, sick, destructive choices. You've gone into things that you've got no sense in being in. There's almost nothing left in your life of what you really are. And the resolution that I made in one of those lucid moments when one is intensely calm was, from this time on, I am never again going to do something that I don't deeply believe in. And that decision, made under that kind of pressure, has stuck with me pretty much ever since. I went home from my heart attack. I sold my business. We had a big 5-bedroom colonial in the richest suburb in the United States, and I had given my wife a sports car for Christmas. We had a liquor bill that was higher in some months than what we now spend for groceries. We gave up all of that. If I hadn't had the wife I had, I could never have made such a drastic change. My wife and I and our 5 kids, 2 to 12, moved to an old farmhouse that rented for $60 a month. The only way the heat got to the upstairs bedrooms was through a hole in the living room ceiling. The kids slept in sleeping bags because the cold upstairs would freeze water. We rented a couple of horses so we could have a little fun, and I went back to college. By moving to the farm, we had enough money to help get me through graduate school. The first year, I entered a master's degree at the University of Minnesota. I found I enjoyed school, so I stayed on and got a doctorate in psychology in the next 2 years. During these 2 years, I started teaching writing at the St. Paul campus and enjoyed that. When I finished my PhD, I stayed on 2 years at the university, but I kept wanting to move to Montana, so as soon as we could, we did. My grandparents had pioneered in Montana, and I had always wanted to live there. But all during that time, I can see now, I was constantly looking for the principles of change. How do you take your life when you've got it all bent out of shape and make it into something halfway decent? And the thing I started looking for hard was the kind of ideas that would help get this life of mine back into some kind of shape, to help reverse some of the wrong trends in my life. Socrates said, "Know thyself." But what is striking to me as I look back on this process that started 7.5 years ago now, is that there are some new ideas around today to help me change and to help you change. There are some things in psychology now that really work. And most importantly, there is a lot of common sense psychology in us and all around us that we just need to open our eyes to. I've seen people who had sunk to the rottenest, lowest levels man can possibly imagine, such as alcoholics lost in Skid Row. Some of them were so shaky they had to send a runner out for their wine. They were even afraid to go out in the street. They were so afraid of all people. And if the runner didn't come back with their wine, they had to figure out a way to get another bucket and a half together so they could get somebody else to go out. Every once in a while, a man in that kind of trouble who had hit bottom would look at his life and say to himself, "I'm going to grow, because if I don't, I'm going to die." And he sees, in my egotism and in my self-centeredness, I have put myself here. I was escaping all responsibility for my actions. By hitting bottom and being hit as hard as he was by life, he is forced to concede. Nobody else is to blame for this. None of the people I blamed are around me anymore. I'm to blame for this. I caused this. And when he sees that, he is on his way. People like that can really turn their lives around. I have walked into groups of people like these at Emotions Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous, where the acceptance they had of me was like the warmth coming from a stove. Emotions Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous are organizations for the emotionally troubled and alcoholics. They also have open meetings anyone can attend. You could feel it, absolutely positively feel it. I'm not talking about some nebulous psychological notion. I'm talking about something I have experienced and that others have experienced, and that is commonplace. You and anyone else could walk into one of those open meetings and you would feel the same acceptance that I have felt. These people in Alcoholics Anonymous and Emotions Anonymous have found and are using the same basic ideas being explored by some psychologists today. The core idea can be expressed simply as an acceptance of yourself. Related to that is acceptance of others. This notion of acceptance works tremendously well. I used to think that these ideas worked only because alcoholics and neurotics were in such extremely critical situations. It was life or death. And I thought, how are you going to hit everyone on the head with a heart attack, or with alcoholism, or with neuroticism so that they can turn their lives around too? But recently, I have found I was wrong about this, and that not so troubled people can use these ideas to improve the quality of their lives. My initial experience of 10 years ago reflected some of my searching. I have found that college students are quite ready and able to take hold of their lives and make some changes so they reverse some of their self-destructive trends. They find they can grow a little in a day instead of die a little, so they are the more beautiful people which each sees potentially within. As I watched my students grow, I thought, sure, but that's because college students are more open. They are more open-minded, not hardened like we adults. A change in my thinking came when I spoke for 3 days to nursing supervisors from 5 states and got an even better response. I thought, well, that's kind of strange. Then I thought about it, and it really wasn't. The older you get, the more experience in living you have. And the clearer the end result of some of these destructive tendencies becomes. When you are younger, you can't see the implications of saying, to heck with taking care of me, baby. I'm going to get that money, man. I've got to have that money to calm my nerves down. My need for money overwhelms me, and I'll do anything for it. So you start down that path, and at first you don't see any consequences for your decision. But when you've been around for 30 or 40 years and seen more of the results of your mistakes, you can say, there really isn't, in material things, what I thought was going to be there. Then I realized these are ideas that both young people and old people, and all the ages in between, already believe in and can handle. You don't need to be sick and down and out to see the urgency and the necessity of them. That, of course, is what we're concerned about right now. What is our potential for really living? What can we do? How and why should we find a different way of living our lives? I see now that we've got the opportunity at any stage of our lives to take a hand in the things that happen to us. I started out in my life with some choices, and I kept branching off in different destructive directions. Had I exercised the kind of restraint I found at 35 when I was 25, my life could have been, I think, different. But 45, 55, or 95 isn't too late to start. I recently talked to 60 businessmen about this set of ideas. I got a better response from them than I got from a class of younger people. That's because some of you younger people, for reasons we will discuss later, have limits on the amount of courage that you have. You have limits on the amount of strength that you have. So many of my younger students find my ideas very frightening. And even though I say to them, hey, you don't need to do anything with the ideas I offer, you just need to understand them. That's all that I'll ask of you. Nevertheless, some can't stand even to listen. Partly, it is because we are all frightened at what we will find in ourselves. The best example I have seen of this was a mother in my class who was really worried about what she might find deep down. She asked me, what if I find I'm a sex maniac? I didn't have a very good answer for her at the time, but now I have. Since the question, I have seen hundreds of people reach deep within themselves, and always what they found has been a relief and a joy, both to the person himself and to those with him or her at the time. Anyone who dares to reach deep within themselves finds something very wonderful. I have seen it happen so often that it is a commonplace to me now. Everyone who is willing to try finds a power and a glory and majesty within them that is just breathtaking. One of my students expressed his thrill at seeing this in others and himself by saying, "Isn't it wonderful that I can be a real me and know how great that is? And also know that if someone doesn't respond to me, it's not the deep me that's wrong. It's just that I wasn't able to go deep enough into myself. So the power, glory, and majesty of you is waiting for you." That sounds bold of me to say, but the mere fact you have this book and you have been able to stand it so far suggests it's true for you too. We are going to be confronted with one huge problem here, and that is that your whole tradition of learning from books and classes has been so word-oriented. The problem with words is that they are very slippery things. And the thing we are trying to learn here is not words. We are trying to learn living. How can you talk about love? How can you talk about a father hugging a child with words? Would you rather have a hug, or would you rather have someone say, "I'd like to hug you"? Talking about something isn't the same as doing it. Well, this is the problem. Words are tricky. And in this book, everything I say to you is wrong. It misses the whole mark. This book is not truth, capital T, because our finite minds cannot know truth with a capital T. We can only try to come as close as possible. And the closest I can come to truth is not in words, but in the feeling behind them. So as you read, you must read between the lines, because that's as close to truth, capital T, as you and I get. And you must see the inconsistencies and not let them bother you, because we are talking about an infinitely complex life from a limited, finite view. When you catch me with two inconsistent ideas, the truth is probably somewhere in between. The ideal kind of teaching is that which goes on outside the classroom, where it is all show and tell and no words. It is almost all teaching by example. Most of the young kids at Bridger Bowl in Bozeman, Montana, are good skiers. Most of them learned to ski by watching other kids skiing and by just doing. They can't tell you how to ski because you just do it, says some little kid as he goes whizzing down the hill. He is learning without words interposing. In this book, you and I will have to overcome that problem. We're going to have to use words, but we must never make the mistake of confusing the words and the knowledge of the words with anything that is really important. The only important objective of this book is to be different. If we are not going to be different, we are just using the words to fool ourselves. Now, it's very simple for me to teach you a whole lot of new words, a whole lot of new phrases, new explanations, and new ways of looking at things. That is very simple. But it is very hard for you to overcome this schooling and bookish tendency, so you can see that what we are talking about is a different way of being. Let me give you an example. One of my summer school students was dean of students in a Midwestern college. When he would come home from class, his two little girls would run to him, but he was busy and said, "No, run along. I can't play with you. Daddy's got to study." And so they pestered him all afternoon and all evening as long as he was trying to work. When he heard me talk about all the physical love the Zulus give their children, he said to himself, "Hey, they need some loving." So when he came home and his little girls came to him, he would sit down, pick them up on his knees, and hold them. He asked them, "What have you been doing today? And how has the day been going for you?" And they would tell him. But after a little while, they would get their fill. They would run off and play, and he could go and study all night long without interruption because they were happy, and he was happy. He had given his little girls what they needed. He had filled their cups that day. In class one day, he said, "You know, I've always had this big shell build up around me as the big dean of students. I can see now that last year I was kicking students out of college just by the numbers. They would walk in the door, I'd look at their records and say, 'You're out,' just like a computer." So in the fall, he went back to the college, and he called in his dean of men, dean of women, and dean of student activities. He sat them down and told them his story. He said, "Look, I've been acting like a Prussian general here. It's dumb. I've been trying to live in a false case, and I'm going to get out of it and try to be a human being. Me." Well, you can imagine the astonishment on the faces of those fellow staff members as the old Prussian turned soft heart. Later he wrote to me and said, "Jess, there's an unbelievable difference here. We've only got half the kids on probation this year than we had last year. The whole student body feels differently because 4 or 5 of the staff who are crucially concerned with the student body changed our way of working with them." Well, this kind of thing is what we're after here. For this book to have an effect on your life, you must not read the words, you must get the spirit of the ideas. An English major was reading the earlier, shorter version of this book. She had separated from her husband, and a friend had recommended the book to her. She told me, "I was antagonistic when I started reading. I found 2 or 3 grammatical mistakes in the first few pages. Then I realized that wasn't how I was supposed to be reading this book. and I had tears in my eyes by the time I got to the 4th chapter. She claimed that these ideas helped her get back with her husband again. Speaking at a religious retreat, a search, capital S, I told the group they must not listen to my words. They must listen between the lines, the way you read a love letter. And afterwards, when the people were summing up what they got out of what I said, a Vietnam veteran said, "Jess, when you said listen between the lines, it really struck me. I had been reading Erich Fromm and trying to practice his ideas. But as you talked, I could see that I was just practicing those ideas on other people, and I wasn't getting the spirit of them. I wasn't getting them inside me. So as you read this book, don't fall into the word trap. Don't rush to tell someone what you've read or argue with some small point. Try to make these ideas come more alive in your life. If you don't or can't do that, you're missing something. These are ideas that have changed people's lives. What are some of the discoveries I have made? I found I needed people because I needed the love they could give me. I found that love was something I did. I found that the way I showed people my need and love for them was to tell how it was with me in my deepest heart. I came to feel that was the most loving thing I could do for anyone. Tell them how it was with me and share my imperfections with them. When I did this, most people came back at me with what was deep within them. This was love coming back to me. And the more I had coming to me, the more I had to give away. And this helped me see deeper within myself, accept myself, and tell more about how it was with me. All this came out of an acceptance of myself as I was. I had to throw away as much of the fake as possible and recognize all my feelings and all my actions as me. So I was able to see and accept, I ain't much, baby, but I'm all I've got. There are a small group of ideas that seem to me crucial. Acceptance, emotional honesty, trust, believing in others, handling our fears, learning to love and work. I was talking to my students about trusting people, and Sherry sat in the front row and fought me. She said, "You can't trust anybody. People are no good. The minute you do something for them, they'll get you." She said, "I worked with my lab partner on a project, and he went and turned it in and said it was all his. And he got an A, and I got a C. Just shows you can't trust people." Well, this was about the 8th week of the quarter, and it was the first time that I had taught these ideas completely. For some reason, I was kind of patient with her. I said, "If that's your experience with life, well, okay, but I just don't see it that way." Later, she said, "I went home that day and I started to think, and all of a sudden, while watching Get Smart on TV, a little light bulb clicked on. I realized what this nut was doing. Educating students to accept people without fears of hurting yourself. All this time, I was accepting the bad part of people, leaving the good part to the selected few, me and my friends. Since people are both good and bad, you cannot accept just a part of them, or rather a part of their behavior. You must accept them as they are, good and bad. If I accept Johnny the troublemaker, I accept both his bad and good qualities. I might not like his bad qualities, but I have to accept him in all matters." Here the nut had turned into a genius. Wait a minute. I might be wrong. I decided I must have proof of his theory. The grouchy old widow neighbor of mine was going to be 55 on Sunday. What the heck, I can make cakes. Why not make her a birthday cake and see what reaction I get from her? Maybe I don't really understand her. I know. I'll bake a cake and let my husband take it down to her. That way, if she barks too loud, I won't get hurt. Stop. You stupid fool, you. I must understand the reason why I decided to make this act of graciousness. Be yourself and put all your effort into it. If she doesn't appreciate it, then I must have done something wrong in presenting it to her. Sunday afternoon, I took the cake down to her. I knocked on the door. I was feeling sorry for myself. Just a minute. You're supposed to give her this cake, and no matter how she barks, try and make her day pleasant. She opened the door and barked, "Well, what do you want?" As I handed the cake to her, I simply said, "Happy birthday." Her face turned white while she said softly, "Please come in." I had never been in her apartment before. On every table and on every wall, she had pictures of her husband, and they showed some of the activities they used to share. As she was cutting the cake, tears came to her eyes. She said, "You know, Sherry, you look quite a bit like my daughter." "I didn't realize you had children," I said. "Oh, yes, I had 4, 1 girl and 3 boys. My husband and 3 boys were killed in an accident. My daughter and I survived, but she scarred her face badly. I've never forgiven myself since then. I had insisted that we take a trip back east. It was in Michigan where the accident happened." What could I say? Here I was, involved in self-pity up to my neck. She had self-pity too, but for more reasons than I could count. All I had done was give her a chance to talk with me, not just at me. So in 1 quarter, 1 man taught me to apply teaching not only in the schoolroom, but also in my own life. Carl Rogers was right when he said, "When I accept myself as I am, I change. And when I accept others as they are, they change." Listening to other people talk on the subject they choose is accepting them and their ideas. It may take years to learn to be the best listener, but at least I'm starting. Listening to your students or other people, you'll find where they are. Where they are is where you begin to teach. I now want to teach. The fear I had is gone. It may come back for a brief stay, but it won't be a crutch. By accepting myself and others, I can see how Freud said, "To love and to work are the only 2 things in this world." I will even push it farther. To work is to love. Teaching won't be a job, but life itself. Every person has a different method of teaching. Mine will come as the students come. My methods will change as my students change. In brief, your process is a process of teaching life. The major part of life is acceptance of others and yourself. Thank you for teaching me to live. Well, I didn't teach Sherry to live. I was just working on that same problem myself, and she happened to listen in, like an ear to a keyhole. That's kind of what you're doing in this book. You're going to have your ear to the keyhole while I try to learn a little bit more about this business of living that I started on 10 years ago in a hospital bed, where if I hadn't changed, I would have died. Now, there are many ways of dying. Most of them involve dying on your feet, like I was doing. I see my young teaching students sitting in class, and almost every one of them are violently opposed to dress codes. Yet I predict that 10 years from now, half of them may vote for a dress code in their schools. That's how far away they are going to get from where they are today, because of an accumulation of little wrong turns and dying to life. I've seen that you can die at a very early age. I had worked these ideas out primarily for teachers. To my mind, the sadness of teaching is this: all of our teachers, good and bad, know what a good teacher is and should do, but only about half of our teachers can do it. That means that only half of my students, only every other one of them, is going to be able to come close to their ideal. I see now that teaching is like all other human relationships. In fact, I think teaching and nursing are 2 of the most intense human relationships outside of the family. My business now is trying to change the odds for my teachers and nurses so everyone has a chance to be the teacher or nurse, or the person he or she wants to be. But I know from bitter experience that there is a limit to how much changing each of us can do. This is a slow process, and it takes patience. In fact, patience is one of the most crucial aspects of it. We can't revolutionize ourselves tomorrow morning. It took me a long time to get all screwed up, so I need to give myself plenty of time to change to some new, better way. I told my students how hard it is for me to accept myself. The first time one student heard this, he realized he had given up on himself. He had been turned down by 6 out of 7 schools for advanced study in physical therapy. He hadn't even checked into the 7th school because it was far away, and he was sure he would be turned down. He went back to his room, sent a letter requesting an interview to the 7th school, and was eventually accepted. All because he first accepted himself. I told the class how poor I was at accepting people. Another nurse realized that she wasn't accepting them either. When they tried to talk to her, she would say she was interested, but she was backing out the door. Now when someone wants to talk, she sits down, even if just for a few minutes, and really listens. I told a mother that I punished my kids partly because punishing them satisfied me. She went home and was horrified to discover that her kids were good on her good days and bad on her bad days. Punishing the kids came mostly from within herself. This realization was enough to help her overcome most of the problem. I told my students how hard it is for me to tell people I love them. One girl came to realize she was building a wall between herself and her parents, and made the first move to tear it down. I told my students how hard it is for me to be real, to tell what is in my deepest heart. But I told them that when I am able to be halfway real with people, they usually respond by being real in return. One student thought that was a good idea, so he screwed up courage to try it on the grouch in the neighborhood. He knocked at his door and announced he had stopped by for a visit. The grouch turned out to be a nice guy from New York who was just not used to the more open ways of the West. I told my students that we all need more love in our lives, that we need more things going for us. One student went home and thought about this. When her boyfriend came that evening, he asked her what she wanted to do. She had been keeping him at arm's length with a constant diet of organized activities on dates. She said, "Let's just ride around and talk." So they did, and before the evening was over, they both realized they had so much in common, they wanted to be married. Extreme examples? No, commonplace happenings. The way one student said it when he finished our time together was, thank you for teaching me what I wanted to know. So these are some of the things that I have kept from, So these are some of the things that have kept me from the closeness with other people that I need, and that is so terribly vital to all of us. In this material world, we've got everything that is possible for a nation to have. We've got 5 times, or 10 times, or 100 times as much material prosperity as anybody else in the world. Yet if anyone wants to argue that it's the material things that make you happy, they've got trouble. In fact, that's one of the reasons, I think, why younger people today are so sensitive to the shortcomings of material prosperity. They're saying, hey, there's a whole big life beyond having a house and a car, and I want a part of that. But the bar to you and me participating in that life is we have to participate in it as we really are. We can't fake. I must deal with the world as I am and as it is. And this way I can get the love and tenderness and joy into my life that I want to. I sat in on Emotions Anonymous when I was first starting this process and said, I wish I had more close personal friends. The minute I said it, I realized I didn't really wish that. I didn't want close personal friends because they'd be too close to me, and I couldn't stand the self-awareness a close relationship would force on me. And I realized I wouldn't want to be a friend of mine. A friend of mine was somebody I took off the shelf, played with for 5 minutes, and then put back on the shelf and said, wait a year or 2, or 5 years until I'm ready to come back and want to be a friend of yours again. What a dumb way to be. So I said, okay. I was ready to face the music and admit that a friend means really being a friend, and you can't have more than 2 or 3 close friends, or you have fallen into that same trap. When I moved to Montana a few years ago, I did it differently. I've got a few close personal friends now. I didn't have them before because I didn't really want them. I didn't dare risk the self-disclosure and self-awareness that was in close relationships. These are the kinds of changes that we're going to be working on. Change in people is psychology, so this is a book about psychology, but don't let that scare you. This book is aimed at helping you control and change your life. It is also aimed at helping you control and change the people around you. These ideas are useful and valuable to all kinds of people in ordinary and in critical situations. They can be useful or vital to you, but you must constantly realize that a mere understanding of ourselves and others is not the only goal. My goal, and I hope you consider it for yours, is to find understanding that can help you and me actually change our lives into more beautiful ones, 5 minutes at a time.